Welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships at Sales Hacker. And today we are diving into how to build an effective pipeline and increase sales by 5 times. So don't we all want to increase sales by 5 times? That's the goal. And before I introduce my 2 awesome guests over here, just a few housekeeping items. So number 1, just like all our webinars, this will be recorded. So if you have to jump off or you think it's valuable to share with an employee, we'll shoot it out to you once we wrap up via email. This is going to be a presentation style webinar. So we got some slides to run through, but do please get involved. So you'll see the little Q&A section, jump on, and we'll try and answer relevant questions throughout. Okay. We've got that out of the way. Now I'd like to introduce our 2 awesome guests. I'm joined by Jeffrey Fletcher, Senior Business Partnerships Manager at Growlabs, and Brian Kotlier, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Head of Demand Gen at Intercom. Jeff and Brian, welcome to the Sales Hacker community.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks very much, Scott. Great to be here.
Love it. Super pumped to have you both. And as always, I do like to add, a little bit more color for the community before we dive into it. Brian, I'm going to start with you. So Brian is the Head of Demand Gen, as mentioned, and Growth at Intercom, which is the world's first business messenger that helps companies acquire, engage, and retain more customers. And prior to that, he led Global Demand Gen for Sprinkler, where he helped the company scale from 90 employees all the way up to 1,200, which is pretty crazy. It must have been quite the ride. And from a 50 million valuation to a 1.8 billion with a B. And when he's not helping grow SaaS companies, Brian is an avid basketball fan, news junkie, and cook. Brian, what's the favorite dish? What's your number 1?
I don't know if it's number 1, but I'm working on ceviches right now, which they either go very well or they go very, very poorly.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the 2, hey? I love it. All right, and Jeffrey Fletcher, of course. So Jeffrey grew up in DC, moved to San Francisco 10 years ago, been in SaaS sales in San Francisco for the last 5 years. You were actually the first sales hire at Growlabs, which I thought was really cool, and are directly responsible for growing your revenue from 0 to that 4 million ARR mark in 1 year, which is pretty wild. And you're now the head of business development and partnerships, and extracurricular, you enjoy a little golf, you're a rower, and of course trips up to wine country. Love it.
There's a lot to do here in the Bay Area, and we certainly take advantage of it.
I love it. Awesome. And favorite wine? Are you a red guy? You white? You going Cab Sav? What are you?
I'm more of a Cab fan. Gotta go red.
Yeah. Red? Love it. Me too. All right, guys. So very, very impressive careers. I'm excited to dive into this. So as I told you both, I'm actually doing this webinar live from Ramp Conference in Boston. So I'm pretty fired up. There's a lot of, sales and marketing juices flowing down here. I just heard a great keynote from Alan Gannett, actually, on creativity, which was super interesting. But, that's not what we're here to talk about today. Today, it's all about, building pipeline and increasing sales. And I know we have a lot of content to get through. So, let's get to it. And Jeff, I think we're going to start with you. Do you want to kind of kick us off here?
Yeah, perfect. Scott, thanks for the intro here. Let me turn the camera so I can say part of this. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about exactly what we mentioned, how to build your sales pipeline. So we're going to start with micro-segmentation, and that's something you're going to hear over and over again in this presentation. Secondly, we'll talk about the omni-channel outreach. Third, the outbound best practices, which is our area of expertise here at Growlabs. And fourth, the inbound best practices, which Brian will walk you through in just a few minutes. Now, this is an illustration of our sales funnel. And today we're going to focus on the top 2 sections here. We're going to talk about how we segment our market into different ICPs. These are some of ours: tech, e-commerce, recruiting, etc. Then we'll get into the outbound strategies versus the inbound strategies. And that's where I'll hand things back over to Brian. The bottom half we'll save for next week. We're running another webinar next Tuesday, and that's when we'll cover the bottom half of the sales funnel, So for today, we'll just focus on the top half.
Love it. And just reiterating to everyone out there, we will be sharing this presentation and these slides. I know a lot of times when people see slides like this, super valuable. So we will be sharing this out. Don't worry.
Yeah. And to your point, I know it looks complicated, but we're going to break everything down. So by the end, you know exactly what these mean. The first thing we're going to talk about is trying to identify your most attractive markets. And we do that with micro segments. As you can see, there are 5 different industries that we're looking at up top here. But below that, they're all broken down into sort of separate buckets. And that's what we mean by micro segments. We're not just looking at the e-commerce industry. We're trying to take it down even further based on things like personas, company sizes, locations, etc. So again, micro-segmentation. This is really, really important, and that's what we'll focus on for the first 5 or 10 minutes here. 4 benefits to this. First, increased conversion. Most important here, right? By identifying these micro-segments, we can send specific messaging to each persona based on their pain points. For example, I'll say something different to a CEO than I would to a sales manager. Right? A CEO might be more concerned with increasing revenue. I'll say as managers might want to save their reps time or get them done. Right? So the first thing, increase conversion. Second, bigger deals. If we can target the right people with the right message, they're going to convert not only faster, but for more dollars. Third, the snowball effect. This one I love talking about. If I'm trying to go after the whole tech industry in the States, it's a gigantic market. But if I could narrow that down to, let's say, a couple tech companies in Chicago or a couple here in San Francisco, and those people talk amongst each other or go to a conference, you can really create some momentum there. Mm-hmm. Snowball effect.
Totally. And just quickly to that point, Jeff, this is, I don't think it can be, overstated how important this is. I know at a previous organization I was with, SaaS company, we were able to get a few, NFL teams, and, then we started building collateral around it. We started really doubling down and targeting them. We just started, knocking them down and creating opportunities with a ton of them. So this strategy can be extremely, extremely effective.
That's exactly right. And you essentially create FOMO for exactly. Other you're reaching out to, right? If you work with the Cleveland Browns and the San Francisco 49ers, and you target the Bears, the Broncos, and you say, look, we're working with your competitors. Do you guys want to hop on board or not?
Yeah,
so,
totally.
You're exactly right. And lastly, you can improve your product. By understanding the pain points of each of these small segments, you can tailor your product to work much better on a larger scale based on the pain points each of these clients is telling you about. For us, that was invaluable. As we started last year selling Growlabs, we didn't really know what kind of pain points we would encounter. But from hearing feedback from all of our clients, we're able to make our product much stickier and much more user-friendly for our different industries and verticals that we're going after. Now, how do we get started with this? This is basically your idea board, right? One of the first things we did as a company was lock ourselves in a conference room and throw a bunch of ideas at the wall, right? We would take anything from our account execs to our engineers and say, all right, which markets do we want to go after? Who should we identify with this? There are no wrong ideas, right? But we want to bake this out and flesh out, all right, why do we think this? Why do we think this is a good target for us? We'll generate some data around that. Once we have that mapped out, we're going to group them into ICPs. This stands for your ideal customer profiles. We'll group them into buckets based on industries, personas, or once we've done that, we can evaluate the attractiveness. Typically, you'll have your high-value targets. Those are your A targets. You'll have your mid-tier. Those are your B targets. Then you'll have your lower rung, and those are your C targets. So we'll evaluate all that and go after them selectively based on how much revenue we think we can generate from each of the separate buckets.
And quick question there, Jeff. So it sounds like a great exercise, but how often are you revisiting this? Because this must change from time to time.
Completely. It's a great question. We do these meetings every single month. Awesome. We'll look at the data from the past 30 days, see what's changed, what we improved upon, and we'll look at this. And through the last 16 months, we've become 3x more efficient with this. Because in the beginning, you're right. We're throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and trying to see what sticks.
Yeah. So it's kind of a fluid process that you keep iterating, changing, adapting.
Completely. Look, you have to, right? Adapt or die.
Yeah, totally.
Especially in the SaaS space. So what are some good characteristics of micro-segments? First, they should be easily identifiable, right? They should have similar characteristics and similar pain points. Again, going back to how you would speak to a CEO or a VP of sales, a little bit different, right? The third point here, they should have the same buying cycle or decision-making process. This gets much more into the size of company you're going after. If I'm talking to an SMB, the deal cycles might be as short as a couple of weeks. But if I'm going after a big enterprise business, that might take 6, 9, 12 months. We want to identify ICPs based on their buying cycle and buying process as well. If I need to talk to one person, that's great. If I need to talk to 12, I know I'm in for a much longer cycle there. Now, the next two slides are a couple of examples of screenshots from the Growlabs platform about how we do this micro-segmentation. What we're looking at here, the top two, we're looking for VPs of sales, heads of sales at SaaS companies. And that is really where most companies stop. People will say, all right, I'm looking for this persona in this industry. But we need to take this not only one, but 2 steps further. So again, going back to the buying cycles here, we want them to be similar. So the company size we limit from 50 to 315. That's our mid-market range, where the buying cycle should be similar. But the last part of this really digs into the micro-segmentation. Because now we're looking at companies who have raised between 2.5 and 10 million. This is a sweet spot for us because we know these companies, A, have money to spend, and B, are looking to grow. Companies who've raised a round are typically looking to scale very, very quickly, which fits in nicely with the Growlabs platform. If I take a couple steps further, we're able to identify very, very specific targets and then send them very specific messaging based on not only their size, but also the recent funding round we probably raised here.
I like it. The total funding amount is so critical because those guys, you know, they're looking to grow. They're mandated to grow. They've got investors hounding them now. It's a good time to reach out. That's for sure.
That's exactly right. It's one of our sweet spots. So those are our A targets, right? Now, this is another one of our customer profiles, and it's slightly different, right? For this one, we're looking at small companies, 1 to 25 employees, or SMBs. At this size, we're going after the very top of the food chain, owners, founders, CEOs, because you're likely to get in touch with them as a smaller company. Plus, they're the DMs in most cases. The industries here are marketing, advertising, sales, training. And usually, that's where people would quit, right? There's your ICP. But again, let's take this one step further. We want you guys to be thinking about constantly, how can I keep narrowing this down? Because the more work you put into this on the front end, the more results you're going to get out of the back end in terms of your engagement. So the last filter we put in is HubSpot. We integrate with them directly. So now we can look at companies using HubSpot because we can say, look, we have other clients using the same CRM. We notice you are too. Here's how we can help. Here's how we've helped them in the past. So we can reference current clients in their space and speak specifically to their pain points.
Awesome.
Right?
And so quickly, Jeff, if you don't mind, we'll just quickly jump over to the community because we've got a good question here. So Earl Van Ness is asking, okay, so if you are selling to a buying committee, you know, we know the average, it's like 7.8 decision makers nowadays are involved in a SaaS purchase. How do you handle the identification of the job title?
It's a great question. What we find is really effective is going after multiple people from the same organization. It never hurts to reach out to 2 or 3 or 4 decision makers who you think might be the right one.
Yeah.
If you get a response from somebody, odds are they're interested. But if they're not the right person, they'll kick it down to their colleague who is. We get lots of positive responses saying, thanks for reaching out. This looks interesting. I'm not the right person. Let me kick this over to John or to Sarah, who is the right person who you should be speaking with. So the worst that happens is a warm introduction to somebody else at the company.
Awesome. Great. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Earl.
Yeah. Now, another technique that we use is lookalikes. As you start out, again, we're going to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall. fix. And again, as we're looking at this on a month-over-month basis, we're looking for where we're most effective, whether that's by industry, whether that's by job title, whether that's by size of company. So we can look at metrics and say, okay, we're having great luck with CMOs. Marketing managers aren't doing as well. Then we can simply shift our focus and reallocate to become much more efficient with this as we move on in month 2, 3, 4, and down the line here. So we've talked about how we identify our ICPs. Now let's switch gears here and talk about how we actually start the process. Again, I'll handle the outbound. I'll throw it to Brian in a minute for the inbound. We're going to speak a lot about our multi-channel workflows here. You'll notice Growlabs is right in the middle of this. So we connect to a bunch of different applications on the back end, like CRMs, Salesforce, HubSpot, and Pipedrive, our website integrations, Intercom specifically, which we use, which of course Brian will touch on. Then on the front end, we'll connect to applications like AdRoll for retargeting, and also Slack that we use for trigger notifications to make our reps more efficient here inside the office.
Nice.
So in the middle, and we'll talk about all of this separately in just a minute.
Sweet. So this is the tech stack that you use at Growlabs. You're opening up the kimono, so to speak.
That's exactly right. It's like collecting baseball cards these days, right? What's in your tech stack?
Yeah, totally.
What's in our tech stack?
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah. So first, we start with email, of course. That's what we automate with our platform. And so that's what we're going to talk about first. But we combine this with other channels to create what we call the multi-channel approach. So on this slide, you'll see LinkedIn. On the next slide, we'll work on our call automation as well. So for our SMBs, for our lower value accounts, we'll do just email and LinkedIn because that we can fully automate. First, we'll send an intro email. A day later, we work with a third party who automates this for us through LinkedIn. They'll get a connection request from me. A couple of days later, they'll get a second email. So already they've seen me in a couple of places, email and LinkedIn. If they connect with me on LinkedIn, they'll get a personalized note, again, that's automated a couple days after that. So now they're getting messages on 2 separate platforms, email and LinkedIn. And we'll continue this process until we can get a response from them. That's what you're looking for. You're trying to engage with these prospects. But as you probably know, email just won't cut it anymore. Everyone's used to getting these in their inbox. Their inbox is pretty full. So the more ways you can engage with someone, the more success you're going to have with this. Now, the next slide takes us one step further. For our higher value accounts, we're going to work in phone calls here too. So the email and LinkedIn look exactly the same. But now, if you connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm going to call and leave you a voicemail. After I send you a note on LinkedIn a few days later, I'm going to call you again to try to engage with you. So now we've got 3 channels working: email, LinkedIn, and phone calls. And because of this, we're able to get to our target touch points quicker than we are by just sending.
And then, Jeff, so each of these as well, so just to reiterate from before, the personalization is going to come based on those micro segments that we talked about before. So each messaging is different based on the pain points and where they're at as a business.
That's exactly right. And that's our next slide. Scott,
Cool.
great meeting.
Perfect.
I don't think that was on purpose, but here we go. So to move back a minute, we talked about the email, LinkedIn, and phone calls. Now we'll talk about how we actually set up the email targeting. So for each micro segment, you want to create separate emails that speak very personally to the persona and their pain point. Below that, we do a bunch of A/B testing here because we want to figure out the most efficient way to do this. So we'll A/B test subject lines, the email body, even the best days and times of the week to get in touch with folks. Now, the sequence itself is fully automated through the Growlabs platform. Typically, we're sending anywhere from 6 to 8 emails because industry averages show it takes 5 to 7 touch points to get someone to respond. Now, Scott, if I were outbounding to you manually and I sent you a 6 to 8 myself and you didn't respond, I'm probably going to give up because I'll think Scott's not the right person. He's not interested. I have a mental hurdle naturally that says, you're probably not the right guy. I'm going to stop at email number 3. With our platform, the beauty of this is that we automate 8 steps. So I can write these emails, on Sunday and then drop you into the sequence. And you'll get 8 emails from me automatically. I don't have that mental hurdle anymore. The platform takes care of that. We get emails every single day from people, from our 7th and 8th one. And they'll say things like, thanks for continuing to follow up. I appreciate your persistence. Thanks for staying on me for so long. And things like that really make a difference because it shows the value of automating the process, right? You've got to get to that 6th, 7th, and 8th touch point. Because with outbound sales, you never know the right timing, right? I can reach out to you now and try to sell you a parka, but it's August. You don't want that now. But I can reach out to you in December and you're like, it's freezing here in Boston. I need this.
Yeah, definitely.
With your platform, when you're selling, right? I don't know if August is the right time for you, but by sending me emails over months, I'm really expanding that time frame where it might be.
Love it. And Jeff, a couple other really good questions from the community here. So we've got Patrick Stern. Patrick, thanks for the question. He wants to know what service is used for the LinkedIn messages.
We have a number of third-party apps that we use for that. One that we're currently using is Orca. I encourage you guys to check it out. It automates everything for us, from the connection to the actual messages.
Awesome. I think I've talked to the guys over at Orca. Cool guys.
Yeah.
And here's a really good question as well from Anne Ludi. Wanted to know, where does it go? Sorry. If your target group doesn't seem to be big users of LinkedIn, what would you recommend? It's a great question.
That's a great question. So that kind of dovetails into my next point. Again, LinkedIn is just one avenue, as is email, as are phone calls. But we have one more that we're going to talk about. Hang on to that question for just a second.
Perfect.
All right. Before I get there, let's talk about the email sequence and the timing, because this is important. Scott, if I sent you 8 emails over the course of 8 days, you would probably get sick of me pretty quick. So what we want to do is space that, right? All we're trying to do is get you to engage with us. So the first email is, here's who I am, here's what I can provide, here's my credibility, right? Then we'll wait for give or take a week. We'll follow up with something, maybe a case study from one of your competitors who we also work with. Try to create that FOMO and build credibility as well. The third email might be content, such as a case study, an ebook, a mention of your company in the news, perhaps, right? Then we'll follow up quickly when the sequence is halfway through and try to really engage with you after 4 steps. After that, the sequence continues through the other 4 steps. So the whole thing takes about 2 months to run through. Point is, we're not hitting you over the head with a tack hammer saying, talk to me, talk to me. We're trying to be strategic and patient because, again, you never know when the timing is right. When it is, Scott will reach back out to me and say, thanks for your persistence. I now know who you are, what you do, what value you can provide. And we have a much better conversation right off the bat. Now, a couple of tips for outbound. Most of our clients have never done this before and aren't really familiar with what they should be sending and shouldn't be sending. These 6 tips we love. So first, they should sound personable. It shouldn't sound like it's coming from a robot. People get these all the time. They will delete them very quickly if they know they're automated. Secondly, keep them short and sweet. No one wants to read a soliloquy from you. It's just too much content. Fit all that you can into the little iPhone preview screen. It helps, right? People are looking at these on their phone. Tell them who you are and what you do very quickly. Third, keep them simple. You know more about your company and your product than they do. You know buzzwords. You know exactly what you do. They might not, right? Dumb this down. Keep it pretty simple. Don't use 10 words when one will do. Fourth, again, create FOMO. Tell them about someone else in their space you're working with. Tell them about a competitor who you've seen great results with. Stories really sell. 5, build credibility with data. Don't say things in general statements like, our clients are seeing great results. We promise this and this. Give them actual stats and data to back it up. Say, Scott's been working with me for 3 months. His SDR team has seen a 2x increase in demos in just 90 days. That stuff is powerful, and data really backs it up and lends you a lot of credibility here. And 6, use your own voice. Don't copy someone else's templates. Be yourself. You know, sales is about being who you are. It's not about fitting in someone else's template and someone else's structure.
Awesome. Love all those tips. And we've got our questions are blowing up, so people are very engaged in this topic. But I want to make sure we keep moving along, and we'll make sure we answer as many questions as possible in the Q&A at the end.
Perfect. So this is an example of an introductory email, and what you should focus on is the orange in parentheses here, right? So the first line, I'm reaching out because we work with other types of companies, and we help them do X, Y, Z. Insert your benefit. We do this by X, Y, and Z. Right? Give them numbers, give them stats, give them something actionable. At the end, again, keep this short. Give them a call to action. I want to know how I can help your company do this. Do you have 15 minutes to chat later this week? Right? So you're trying to cram as much solid information in here as possible. Be brief, but also make this actionable and give specific examples of how you can help their company and alleviate their pain points. Now, Scott, to go back to your previous question, if you're targeting an industry that doesn't have a big LinkedIn presence, what are other avenues you can take? Right? For this, we use AdRoll. And I always like to give the example. Scott, let's say you're kicking around your conference and you're bored and you go on Amazon and look for a book during lunchtime. Let's say you're looking for 5 or 6, but you don't buy anything. You just save the page for later, right? This afternoon, when you're looking at ESPN.com, you get a banner ad that says, Scott, look at these 6 books on Amazon you were just checking out 2 hours ago. Amazon does this ad retargeting better than anybody. And that's what we're trying to copy here by using AdRoll. So what happens is, as I send you an introductory email, we have triggers set up where if you open my email, now I'm going to retarget you with AdRoll. So as you're browsing the web later today, this afternoon, you're going to see a banner that says Growlabs on the side. So again, we're trying to get your attention from multi-channels here, not just email. But hopefully, you saw my email this morning. Maybe you remember my name, maybe you didn't. But when you see the banner ad later, you're going to say, why does Growlabs sound familiar? Then when you get a second email from me a couple days later, you're going to say, okay, I know who this company is. What are they trying to do? What are they trying to sell me? Can I engage with them? Again, we're trying to get at you from as many avenues as possible. And AdRoll is one that we found really, really effective. Our engagements have gone up by 50% by retargeting people with AdRoll here. Right? So we're not just doing emails, phone calls, LinkedIn. Now we're targeting you as you surf the web in your daily life.
That's impressive. 50% boost in response rates. Wow.
And again, this is fully automated. So from our sales reps' perspective, they're not putting any extra work. They're just dropping the same prospects into their AdRoll campaign and letting this run for them. The last trigger that we have to make our sales reps more efficient is through Zapier and Slack. Now, as you're engaging with people via email, you're probably doing this at scale. Typically, you don't have enough hours in the day to cold call everyone who's doing this. This is why we're trying to do this strategically through either a LinkedIn connection or their open rates. Through Zapier, I set up a trigger where if someone opens my emails 5 times, I'll get a Slack notification right away. So I'll know they're probably looking at my email or they're passing around the company, and they're actually interested in what I have to say. They're interested in engaging with me. Those are the folks that I want to call. That maximizes my call time every day. So I'm not wasting my efforts cold calling 100 people who haven't even seen my first email. I'm calling people who looked at this a bunch, and they were probably interested in the demo.
Very cool.
So those are some of the multi-channels that we're utilizing, right? Not just email, not just phone, but LinkedIn, AdRoll, Zapier, and Slack. All right? Now,
Awesome.
I think I've talked enough here for a minute. At this point, we're going to switch gears. I've done the outbound. We're going to turn it over to Brian here, who's going to talk about the inbound.
Hey, everybody. So I'm going to kind of share a couple things with you. I'm going to sort of be speaking in 2 minds. First, as a budget holding marketer, how these tactics that Jeff just walked through and some of the things that I'll share with you, how they affect sort of the buyer journey and how you can more effectively engage with somebody like yourself. At the same time, I want to share with you some really starkly different and new ways that you can be managing inbound lead, create the process that Jeff just shared, that can really dramatically increase the volume of opportunities and at-bats you're essentially giving your sales organization. That's really the thing I want to focus on here is that we're trying to put more power in the hands of a sales organization to sell more effectively, just give the team more opportunities to engage and sell. And unfortunately, a lot of the way that we've historically done inbound, because it takes so long, is so mediated so heavily by technology, it's really challenging to give your sales team the chance to actually sell. And the drop off in the funnel, because of everything that gets in the way, is pretty dramatic. And in the end, all the effort that you put in with the ads, with the emails that Jeff just shared, a lot of it's wasted simply because you're not getting to the lead fast enough and you're not giving the sales team the opportunity to sell that lead. So I'm going to talk through some of the ways that the inbound is changing and how you can take advantage of it. So with that, we already talked about what Intercom is. It helps you capture, convert, and retain. And I should note that a lot of the examples I'm going to share with you are things we do ourselves at Intercom because it's the best data I have to share. But I would emphasize that this is not an Intercom specific thing. What we're really talking about here is a big change in how you buy and how your sales teams can take it.
Awesome.
So the first thing I want to talk about is basically the form problem. Which is essentially that you're going to send, you're going to define your ICP. You're going to build a beautiful cadence, either in partnership with your marketing team or with your sales operations team, and you're going to be sending out a ton of email as soon as you embrace this channel. I'll say as a buyer, routinely, I'll get an awesome email with a clear value prop, a reason I should open the thing, and you want to know what I do? I copy and paste the domain that came with that email into a browser, and I go check this thing out. I want to see what's going on. And in that moment, essentially, I have a couple paths. If the company seems interesting, I can reply to the email and engage in sort of an endless swirl of emails back and forth about should we call, when should we call, why should we call, or I can fill out a form, which is essentially what I'm thinking to myself is I'm putting myself in a database to be marketed and harassed for the next 20 years of my life. And essentially that's what I'm talking about is the form problem. And all of our buyers, because they're savvy, they're sophisticated, they didn't just discover the internet, they're consistently being confronted with that set of choices on the back of your super compelling outbound sales cadence that you've now run. So you've done all this work to create the inbound lead, but you're making it hard for them to buy. And that's generally the issue here. And I think the data stands up, there's data point after data point, but the one I always reference essentially is that it generally takes 2 days from when the lead fills out the form until they actually sort of get a response and start to schedule a meeting. If you think about everything that can happen in those 2 days, they can start to travel with a competitor, they can lose interest, they can get fired, who knows? But there's so many things that can go wrong. Why would you want to leave that to chance? So that's
yeah, and you got to think too, right? If they're putting a form submission in with you, they're probably putting it in with your 5 other competitors. Let's not kid ourselves. Yeah, what's the other crazy stat? Maybe Jeff, you might know it. The drop-off period. If you don't get to them in 5 minutes, it's like drops off by like 70% or something wild. I butchered that fact, but it's something very startling.
Yeah, I don't know the exact data, but I've led pretty large SDR teams in the past and absolutely consistently have seen that exact thing. It's maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's an hour, who knows? But the point is to say the vendor who gets there first is almost always the vendor that has an advantage throughout the sales process. And I think you really need to internalize that because it means that response time and being real time really matters and makes a big difference in sort of the business outcome.
Absolutely, because you're first to the bat. You get to set the stage, right? You decide what's important to them. You start using your jargon, your buzzwords, and then they're going to look for that in your competition.
Yeah, we can have a whole digression about trap setting and all that good stuff, but let's stick with inbound for now. So then the question you have to ask yourself is why make your buyers endure that whole process? Why don't you just talk to them? And this is, I know this seems like unbelievably naive and simple, but it's actually a pretty stark change in how things work. Until very, very recently, with the advent of tools like Intercom and others, if a lead hit your website inbound, their only choice was to dial a number, look you up on a map and go visit your office, I guess, or fill out a form. There was actually no way for them to talk to you in that moment. And none of those things is a good idea. Who in their right mind fills out a form, calls an 800 number, or gets in a Lyft or Uber and visits an office to buy something? These things just don't happen. So like, it's important to say this may feel obvious, you know, in terms of how humans interact, but it's very novel and different for how businesses interact. And I think we should hold ourselves to the standard of actually talking to our prospects. Crazy revolutionary concept, but I think important. And the thing about doing that is it makes a big, big difference in conversion. It actually does have a huge impact on revenue. We did a big study. We pulled 20 million conversations that have kind of funneled through our platform over the years. Some of them may have been Growlabs ones, who knows, they're all anonymized. And what we found from doing this big data study was we discovered that the leads who choose to chat are 82% more likely to convert than any other lead type. That's not Intercom data. That's like uniform data across people that have Intercom installed. So it really can make a massive difference for your sales team. You know, if you're going to spend, human time is precious. Sales time is precious. Where are you going to put their time? Well, you want to put them in a place where it's going to maximize conversion. And what we've seen consistently is that if your sales team chats, you're going to get a better yield on that time than a lot of other channels where they could be spending that same 5, 10, 15 minutes. And really what's happening, why that's so effective, is essentially what you're doing is you're following the exact same sales process. So all you process junkies that have made you very successful salespeople, don't worry, you don't get rid of that mentality. You have to keep that mentality, but understand that you can start to collapse your stages and collapse your process by inserting this idea of real-time selling. So kind of on the left, I'll share kind of this flow, and then I'll talk about sort of how chat changes this flow. So on the left, you have your traditional funnel, which is you send the email to your ICP, they see the AdRoll ad, or they copy paste the domain, they click it, and they hit your site. They feel like it's paying off sort of the value prop and promise they saw on the other channel. They fill in a form, they become a prospect, a bunch of automation runs on it, marketing scores it, ships it to sales, sales reaches out, they have an intro call, that comes opportunity, and so on. You know, your very traditional, heavyweight enterprise sales process. On the right, you can see that, you know, this is illustrative, of course, but the idea is that that same visitor hits the site, and in the moment when they're intrigued by the value prop, the moment that they kind of pay off on the ad or the email, a bot pops up or a chat pops up and says, hey, do you want to talk to us right now? And I'll share in a moment a few workflows you can follow. But the point is to say you can essentially offer a customized and personalized experience to that ICP in the moment they hit your website. And it is not hard to do, or is it expensive to do. And what it does is it collapses that whole visitor, prospect, lead, MQL series into from what could take us weeks, optimistically days, into like literally like seconds, minutes, perhaps hours, depending on what your staffing and configuration looks like. So that's kind of the concept to try and wrap your mind around. So here's an idea, here's an example of how this could work. Essentially, and again, I'm using Intercom here, it's the product with which I'm most familiar. Essentially, what would happen is you would pull in a visit, and essentially either using in-house data or the originating source of where that lead came from, so the ad or the email, you kind of know things, which is, again, a novel, fun concept that we as marketers and salespeople get to play with now. We know stuff. When somebody comes to our website, we can know their Alexa rank. We can do a reverse IP lookup. We can see a cookie. We can know they opened an email in the past. We can know what ad source they came from based on the UTM parameters. And essentially, all that information is available to your messenger to pop and offer a very specific response and call to action based on that originating data. So in the case of Jet's example, or yours, Scott, if it's the NFL, you know that they came in off the NFL campaign. That information is available to your messenger. So when it opens, it says, can we show you 50 ways how we help sports teams, or maybe not 50, can we show you 5 ways how we can help a sports team get more butts and seats for their event, or, you know, whatever. I'm inventing nonsense at this point. But, you know, and so just imagine all the different ways you can cut company information or behavioral information to ensure that that message that they see, highly, highly relevant. It also is kind of cool when you want to do account-based stuff, because as you're doing your account-based outreach, you can sort of have account-based patterns kind of built into the message that comes back. So it's very, very flexible. The key thing is having your ICP defined, having the data available so that the messenger can respond appropriately. So you still have to do all the prep work that Jeff talked about, but you can really monetize it better when folks come to the website.
That's super interesting, because I know folks, you know, we're kind of always told personalize, 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 but I feel like people always just think of outbound. And so this is so interesting that we can now personalize, you know, the inbound workflow as well. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, it's just a way more engaging thing than a static form. And you have, because it's actually a piece of software that's smart, you can do so much more than represent a static.
Yeah, yeah.
So now once somebody, hopefully you've offered a really clear, compelling value prop or piece of content or whatever the appropriate call to action is, and a person chooses to engage, now what happens is they're going to hit sort of your inbox, sort of now the company facing side of the messenger. And that's where you have the opportunity to engage. And that's where it's really critical, again, that you have good, clean data and thinking, because now you can route those leads to the right places. So if it's from an ABM campaign, you want it to maybe bypass your SDRs and go directly to the account executive that's been trying to break into Coca-Cola for the last year and a half and has been getting hard no's. Or if it's coming from your SMB segment where you're not going to invest as much as Jeff was sharing, maybe you send that into a round robin inbox where the SDRs just pluck them and work them as they go. So it really depends on what your sales motion is, and by having that intelligence on the front end and offering the right call to action, now on the back end, you can have the appropriate routing so that you're applying the right level of effort and the right kind of response cadence. So again, you're really going to leverage all the pre-thinking that Jeff talked about and how you configure a workflow for when these people come through this particular channel. And then I would recommend really thinking hard about that, because you don't necessarily want your really expensive AEs talking to your SMB leads that are not super qualified, or vice versa. Coca-Cola finally shows up. Do you want, your junior SDR who just joined the company engaging with them? It'd be a good learning experience, but probably not the best ROI for the business. And then the last comment I'd make here is you have an opportunity to be super engaging. If you have the right messenger implemented, again, I'm using Intercom as an example, you can do a lot more than just chat. And I think that's actually really critical. And another new innovation, this is like brand new stuff new in the space recently, you can take that chat and instead of sort of chatting away and having a whole interaction there, again, salespeople need the opportunity to quickly respond, objection handle, really sell. And so you can kind of branch the conversation to a lot of spots. You can set up a calendar invitation to get on the phone for down the road if that seems like the most likely thing, and it'll integrate with Calendly or whatever you're using to make that work. Or what I'm really excited about is, again, it's this real-time thing. You can literally put right there a Zoom link or a Google Hangout link or a Talk to Me Now, a phone call link, an air call link, and get on the phone, click to call right then, and you're live on the phone selling. And so you have this opportunity to go from the AdRoll ad to the website CTA to the appropriate person inside your company to a call. If you follow the sort of the ideal workflow here in 90 seconds. Now think of that versus the traditional form-driven approach to this, and it just, there's no comparison. Of course you would want to do it this way if you can configure it right and make this work.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what I love about this too is, like, as we're going through this, it seems like, okay, it's a daunting task to take on, but if you can tackle this problem and do it at the same time with your outbound and inbound, and the same exercise that kind of Jeff described, you could duplicate and make minor tweaks for your outbound and your inbound process. It's the same concept.
It's a fantastic point, Scott. And I think that's why I want to emphasize the prep work that you do to have an effective outbound program that Jeff was walking everyone through is essentially, it's the foundation of this. And the tech on this side is actually the easy part. It's one of those beautiful things where like SaaS products have made life easier. You're just putting JavaScript on your website. You're going to a pretty easy WYSIWYG configuration. The tech is not the problem. It's knowing what you want to do. And so if you've thought hard about outbound and your audiences and your segments, configuring all this is actually should not be a daunting task. It's going to take work, but like what in life that's worth doing isn't work. So
yeah.
So I'll quickly just run through some results. So we do this here at Intercom. I'll share some of our own information here. Basically, we don't think about live chat as replacing channels. We think of it as additive. And I actually would recommend that everyone on the call think of it the same way. Like a lot of times with the new trend, it's really exciting. You start throwing away other stuff that's making you money. It's like, generally my advice is slow down for a minute. Don't stop making money, but do experiment and do drive yourself forward with new technology. And so on the left here is kind of mirroring that product funnel, sort of our traditional MQL funnel, where somebody would come in and go through that process I shared. And generally what we would find is about 8% of those MQLs become sales qualified, and net about 2% of the MQLs ultimately would become customer, which is pretty, I would say pretty standard, maybe a little bit better than average, but not much. So pretty standard funnel for the traditional side. Live chat's super interesting because when those chats start, what you discover really quickly once it's up is that from chat start, which sometimes, let me on, people will just type in hi and then vaporize on you. But from chat start to an actually engaged live chat that you're having to SQL and ultimately to close, what you discover, as you can see in the chart, is the drop-offs are far, far, far smaller. And again, we attribute that to the collapsing timeline. You're talking to the person when they're interested, when they want to buy. And as a consequence, you don't get these crazy drop-offs created by time lag and vendor and competitive intervention. So you can see a really meaningful increase in the rate from the equivalent of an MQL, so chat, all the way down to closed one. And in general, we often will find, I think I have a slide about a sample of customer in a minute, you find like 20 to 30% increase in opportunity creation, pretty much off the bat for anyone that puts us on their website. I don't want to say it'll work everywhere, but that's a pretty standard proof point that we see across our customers when they adopt this.
Wow.
Now, the one thing I will say, what consistently almost 100% of the time, people will kind of say, yeah, but I don't want to have all my sales team necessarily sitting here doing this. I don't have a fully built out support team that can work this channel. And so I always kind of like to take a minute here and say, if you want that benefit, there are ways to obtain it without necessarily having to staff up like crazy and have people 24 hours a day manning chat. And that's where bots really play a big role. We believe at Intercom that there's sort of a balance. You want to let your humans do what they're great at, which is selling, objection handling, being thoughtful and engaging and understanding like a high value sales process. And you want bots to kind of do everything else. If it's not high value, if it's not making your company as much money as possible, why would you have your expensive, well-trained people that you spend months recruiting doing that work? You should move that to the role of a bot. Striking that balance can be hard. Nonetheless, if you do it right, we often will see a further 36% increase in conversion by adding a bot to the chat channel versus just having a staff by humans. And again, that's a response time thing. The bot's there always. And the bots, they're sort of with discipline. They always are doing the correct thing. They don't kind of diverge from the process. And so that's where the bot can play a really powerful role versus doing.
Yeah, and you're reading our community's mind. We had a few questions about bots come in, so that was perfect.
Perfect. So a couple ways that bots can really help. The first is helping distinguish your customers from your leads. A common concern is, I don't want my salespeople doing customer support. So a bot is a really easy thing you can implement to quickly kind of give people a decision tree. It's like, ask them, or either based on your in-house data, logged in state cookie, or based on, a decision tree you can publish to the person. Are you a customer? If so, you send it to a support inbox or a different queue that has a lower SLA potentially versus the sales SLA, which really you want to be as close to instant as you can make it. So that's a really powerful role of bots, is to kind of do that separation between audiences. Another one is to just divert support questions outright. So for example, Intercom, we have a knowledge-based product that integrates with our bot. So if somebody has a question that is already answered in the knowledge base, the bot just answered it, and generally the person goes away. So you're really reducing the load on your SDR team and your support team by having the bot handle a lot of this very basic sort of yes/no binary questions, or obvious ones like, does your help desk have this? Yes, it does. Here's the and very easy stuff like that. You can also qualify with the bot, which is super valuable for deciding where to route. So if it's off hours and you're not staffing, or you just want this to be your standard cadence because you get too much inbound, you can actually have the bot run through some basic questions. How big are you? Are you in the SMB segment? Whatever. Do you have a project now? You can even get a little bant in there if you want, to sort of get the pre-qual going to make your SDR's job easier, or divert right past the SDR if it's the right company and go right to somebody that can close the deal. I talked a bit about routing already. And then the last is super powerful. It's just scheduling the demo and discovery calls. Like, how much email is created in this world and how much human effort is wasted in this world just by scheduling stuff. So if you just let your bot do all the scheduling, it's like having a personal admin for every single SDR on your team instead of forcing your SDRs to burn, hours and hours per week on things that are pretty low value. It's just, they can't time. Like, why would we bot? So those are a bunch of great ways to use the bot. On the other side, though, as I mentioned, there's a lot of stuff you want your humans to do. So you don't want to take the demo out of your people's hands. In my opinion, and I feel pretty strongly, if you're going to sell value, which means you're going to have lower churn, higher revenue, all those things, you want your people selling. You can jump right to doing discoveries right from a messenger. In some cases, you can actually do things like upgrades right through a messenger. If you use Stripe, for example, you can start doing subscriptions. In e-commerce, we see a lot of people using our Stripe integration because it helps kind of close e-commerce deals at a time. And then the last is you can offer essentially non-sales CTAs. So that's what we reference by nurture. So some people are going to be ready to buy. A lot of people are going to want to do something else. And so you can offer sort of those other calls to actions, like signing up for a webinar like this one, consuming content, whatever it may be. In your messenger. And one thing I would encourage, kind of emphasizing what Jeff said, is you want to look for messengers that talk to your core stack. Like, we have this problem of just sort of stack fragmentation that is it's turning every salesperson, every marketer into a technology person when that's not necessarily, again, the best use of their power. I would look for things that integrate with Slack, integrate with Marketo if you use it, integrate with HubSpot if you use it, integrate with Salesforce if you use it. And of course, Intercom does all those things. But do what really emphasize as part of your purchase process. Make sure it's going to work with the tools you have, because otherwise it's going to be very hard to adopt this new channel and this new way of working.
Cool.
And then I guess, as I mentioned, just a closing comment, as I said, most people see a pretty instantaneous benefit from this because there's a lot of value already locked up in your web traffic that you're not monetizing because of the forms problem and because of the scheduling problem. So generally what we find is pretty much you turn on live chat and you instantly see a boost in lead volume and opportunity volume in 20%-ish range, just because there's value sitting in your traffic that your marketing team and your sales team have worked super hard to create that you're not monetizing. So like, I'm not too big of a believer in growth hacks. I think life is difficult and generally you got to work for it. But there are some things that are pretty logical, and this is one. If you add an additional channel to an underperforming traffic type for your website, it's generally possible to monetize more of that traffic. And this fits into that pattern where you can do a pretty straightforward implementation and get some benefit quick.
Totally.
And I think I covered all this. This is just sort of a summary slide in terms of some of the benefits you generally see. Again, high ROI on your SDR's time, better conversion on visits to your website. As a consequence, generally more personalization and being more sensitive to the sales motions you're running elsewhere. Your deal velocity increases appreciably because you're tagging all those steps. And then last point I'll make is, again, just you should really think hard about how bots can fit into your strategy because they will make your people more effective and your team much more efficient.
Love it. Beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, guys, that was amazing. Lots of good nuggets in there. I was actually taking a few notes at a few sections in there, and I do 2 of these a week. So that was awesome. So we've got a ton of questions, and thank goodness we've got another one of these coming up on Tuesday, because we've definitely struck a chord here. People are very interested. So let's dive into questions. We got about 8 minutes, so let's get through as many as we can. Brian, I'm going to kick this one over to you. Lots of interest in bots, and you did a great job articulating kind of the value there. We've got anonymous attendee who wants to know what would be a great bot program to use.
Well, I guess what I'll say, I have a small bias here, but Intercom is again, I try not to be too biased, but like we are investing a ton of R&D and effort into building bots that sales and marketing want. Not sort of generic workflows and things that actually like an SDR will benefit from the first day you turn it on. So I would for sure recommend taking a look at Intercom. In particular, just a small plug, we're announcing a bunch of additional bot-related capabilities tomorrow. We have a big event that we're going to be announcing it at. So I also kind of watch this space. But again, to be fair and agnostic, there's a lot of innovation happening in AI and bots in general. And so I honestly believe like you can put Intercom head to head with almost anything out there, and you'll find that it's going to be a great fit for you, in particular because of the way that our bot capabilities will allow you to capture leads, then onboard and engage, which is really critical. Just getting a lead doesn't help much if they never actually use your product. And so that's another really great part of Intercom. And then last is ongoing support. So it's like if you want a bot product that's built for all 3 of those stages that can help kind of do full funnel growth for your company, I think I would put us up against anything. But understand that there's a lot of innovation, a lot of work happening in this space, and full credit to everybody who's trying to solve it.
Yeah, awesome. And yeah, something I have my eye on for sure. It's an exciting space to be in for sure, and you guys are definitely leading the way there. Okay, over to you, Jeff. I've got Caitlin Birch has a great question here, and it's a little bit difficult, so put your game time pants on here. Okay, so. It's something a lot of companies are struggling with right now. So I work with many customers in Europe and Canada, shout out Canada, where outbound emails are actually prohibited. Love to hear some strategies that you guys are using for non-US clients, if you have them.
We do. We have a global database, and we have clients actually around the world. One thing we're completely CASL compliant. We have dozens of clients in Canada. That's not an issue for us whatsoever. GDPR is a bit more complicated, as I'm sure you know. Long and short of it is if you're getting their information from a public site or a public domain, then you can send them sort of one-off business emails with very specific calls to action. You can't send them solicitations or things like that, but you can certainly open a conversation. Now, for that, I would tread lightly. I mean, we want to see how this whole thing plays out, to be totally transparent. But it doesn't mean that we stop prospecting in Europe. We tend to have a much shorter cadence with that. Some people are hesitant to receive our emails, and that's fine. We always include an opt-out or unsubscribe message. But the first email is kosher, so we're not opposed to doing it, and it's something that we're continuing. We're just treading a little lightly at the moment to see how it all plays out. But it's one of those things where I would be cautious, and if you have any questions, consult your own legal counsel. That's what we've done. That's what our competitors have done. And so far, so good. And, you know, it's one of those slow and steady.
Yeah, I would emphasize the same. We had a legal team. Intercom's a bit larger, so we have the luxury of lawyers. And we had our legal team go deep on it. And that was very similar feedback, which is like, while GDPR, it's super important to be very cautious and follow the rules of unsubscribe and things like that. It wasn't written to stop salespeople from selling. It was written to stop spammers from spamming and give Europeans the right to be forgotten. Yep. And so if you are careful and conscientious about how you approach the channel, it can still be done. But America kind of feels a little bit like the Wild West right now as compared to Canada and Europe. And so you really need to coach your teams and set up your databases to go for that, or otherwise you are kind of inviting trouble long term.
Yeah, yeah. And I would agree with both of you there. Yeah, the funny thing, so I'm Canadian and have worked at Canadian SaaS companies selling it to other Canadian companies. And I guess it was 2 years ago when Castle was implemented, which is essentially the Canadian GDPR. And everyone was like, oh, the sky is falling. Like every sales marketer was like, it's over. Like I'm going to go, you know, work at Best Buy or something now. And, but it kind of came and then people were cautious and then it kind of went and people went back to, you know, doing, not spamming. Of course you should never spam, but the show definitely went on. So, but yeah, of course, consult legal. So, all right. So next question, again, this is going to be directed at both of you guys. Do you think it's worth it? So this is just to set the stage, asking when you're setting up these outbound email cadences, do you think it's worth calling, you know, the entire email sequence throughout, or only if they click on something or they've shown some sort of participation?
Well, I can address this directly. It depends on how much time you have. It depends on how many people you're targeting. If you're targeting 50 people, I've got time to make 50 phone calls every day. But if you're targeting 500, then it becomes, all right, who do I actually value? Who should I be calling, right? Once you scale up and get to a volume where you can't make 500 outbound dials in a day, there simply aren't enough hours, then you should be much more selective with it. And that's what we've found to be really effective. We obviously use our own platform and we use it at scale. And to that point, I think having the opens as a trigger is a really, really good way of keeping us efficient in-house. But if you're working with a much, much tighter target market, if you've got the time, go for it. We find that, especially with the lower value targets, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to spend our hours doing that. But for higher value targets, I can certainly make 15 or 20 cold calls every day, no problem.
Yeah, and I would agree. I think my recommendation generally is to leverage automation without tripping over into spam areas. Leverage automation everywhere you can at the lower end, and then really invest in personalization at the high end. And so if you've thought really hard about your segments and things like that, or you kind of structured your SDR team or your sales team around that, generally you'll find that, yeah, like we've got folks with 20 accounts. There's no reason for, like, they don't need automation. And if they're asking for automation, they're probably not working very hard. And then you've got folks with 5,000 accounts, and asking them to write a personalized email and leave a voicemail for every person in that list is hard. There are some interesting tools that have started to speed up some of that calling stuff. Yep. But nonetheless, it's a lot to ask of the folks to leave a thoughtful voicemail on that.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right, Jeff and Brian, it looks like we've got about 1 minute left. I wish we could continue this all day because we have about 40 questions. So good thing we are, like I said, we're doing a follow-up to this next Tuesday. So make sure that you register on Sales Hacker. And if you do have specific questions for Brian and Jeff, these are the two best ways to get at you guys?
Yep.
Perfect. And LinkedIn, just your names, nothing cheeky, throw people off?
No, I'm easy.
Yeah, nothing cheeky, just our names.
Perfect. And Brian, you did mention you guys are doing some big release tomorrow. Where can people find some information on that?
Yeah, if you just swing by intercom.com, today we have some like pre-announcement stuff, and then tomorrow will actually be the announcement itself. I would recommend definitely dropping by intercom.com tomorrow. We're announcing a bunch of really cool sort of technology for sales and marketing professionals that I think I will answer and I think address any questions folks have, and a really nice follow-on to some of the stuff I shared today. So if bots and chat are interesting, if real-time selling, as I kind of shared it, is interesting, definitely swing by intercom.com tomorrow, and you'll kind of get an eyeful of cool stuff that we've been building for you.
Love it. Awesome. And again, make sure you join us next Tuesday. But Brian, Jeff, thanks again for your time and insight. This was a lot of fun. And Sales Hacker community, thanks for joining us. Have a great week, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Scott.
See ya.